the TEFL Commute, Season 10, Episode 5, Disruption, in which Shaun and I disrupt English language teaching and English language teaching classes. Let's get started. Hello.
Hello. You right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, that was. I don't know. I kind of started. I was mimicking your accent almost. I thought in my head, and it came out all wrong. So.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my British. That was my British. Yeah, but it just came out wrong.
Oh, I see. So you spent one night in my company, at my actual company, and then you just want to be like me. I'm taking that as...
I see. All right.
Should get down to
it. Yes, let's get down to it. If you're joining us for the first time by accident here, you are listening to the TEFL Commute with hosts. I'm Lindsay and Shaun is the other host. We're both English teachers, and in this podcast, it's not about language teaching, but the topic seems to come up. And it doesn't seem to be about language teaching right now,
no, but it will be later.
What's today's episode about, Shaun?
Disruption. I tell you what, well, there you go. So if people are going, what? So let's begin with a quiz. There's always a quiz in our podcast somewhere. So what do these have in common, Lindsay?
Okay.
Please, people listening, excuse my pronunciation here. So, Indigo Ag, Didi Schwang, The We Company, Grab, and Rent the Runway. It's some kind of random.
No idea. No idea.
Okay, how about Netflix, Spotify, Airbnb, Duolingo, and arguably Uber?
Okay, so what do those have in common? Well, those are all startups, web startups that became really popular. They are all companies, big companies. And I guess because the title of our show today is Disruption, can I guess that they have something to do with disrupting their respective industries?
Yeah, that's supposed to be. So the first five, which I'm not going to... So Indigo Ag, which is an agricultural startup. Didi Shuang, which is a Chinese transport company, I think. The We Company, which is an AI company. Grab is another transport company, and Rent the Runway, I think, is obvious, is a fashion company. These are reputed to be the top 5 disruptive companies of 2019, but I think most people haven't heard of them. So when people think about disruptive companies, if you want to contextualize it, I think Netflix, Spotify, Airbnb, etc. are better for people to understand what that is. And people are now going, what? Disruptive?
Yeah.
What?
Disruption? What?
Yeah. But well, actually, you say that, but this is another episode that I blame on you, Lindsay.
Yes.
I know it's my idea because obviously now that you're one of the big influencers of ELT, since you've done an IATEFL plenary, there are things that you said then that we're still picking up in episodes here. And so if I go back to when you were talking about technology, it was you that put this idea in my head at some point during your IATEFL talk, which you can still view online. You said that you were talking about education and about things in education, disruption in education, and you said predictions of destruction of the old world and the rise of the new world, all because of technology. And then you went on to say people have claimed the death of music, the death of newspapers, the death of hotels, the death of cable TVs, the death of taxis, and then the educational link, the death of universities. And this got me thinking about disruption and language teaching
yes.
with it.
Yeah, I mean, to just kind of like put another shine on that. I mean, I was interested in this talk. I was interested in the narratives, the stories that are told about education technology and about technology in general. So someone who's been really good on this has been Audrey Waters, and she was one of the people I was drawing on a lot for my talk. And she talks a lot about this, the myth, she calls it, of disruption. And she talks about like all cultures around the world. And she claims that Silicon Valley is a culture, unto itself, and therefore they latch onto it. But all cultures like to have kind of a myth of the end of times where things are going everything's gonna be destroyed, wiped out by a big flood or a cataclysmic event or some kind of destructive thing, which will destroy a lot of things, cause a lot of pain, but in the end will be all worth it because paradise awaits on the other side. And I think a lot of the narrative of disruption in those things I talked about, in terms of music, newspapers, hotels, does kind of lean into that myth, the whole, it'll all, yes, there will be pain as Airbnb slowly destroys the world of hotels. Yes, it's painful. Yes, but in the end, it's going to be so awesome. And the same thing, about self-driving cars and disrupting, Uber disrupting transport and, all the stuff disrupting newspapers or TV, like Netflix has disrupted TV, but, and there was a lot of short-term pain, but the gain in the end is we're supposedly then going to be in a utopian type thing. And in terms of education and language teaching, I think specifically in language teaching, it's the most present I've seen it has been in sort of the death of books. So we've often talked about we're always, I think the expression is poised for disruption in the world of textbooks, that very soon, books are going to completely die. They will be replaced by the thing that we will be all using on our tablets. And while that has begun to happen in some places, it never quite makes it. It always seems to be just on the horizon, which keeps us, in a way, if you read all the stuff, we're in a state of, constant either dread because, oh my gosh, are we going to be ready? We're not ready for it. Or of a hot anticipation, oh, it's so close. Maybe next year we'll go full tablet and no more books. Maybe in 2 years time, or I'm sure it's going to happen. So that's what I was.
I think you give some good examples of that in your ITFL talk. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Books are always dragged up, and obviously we both write stuff, and the number of conversations we've had about, you must have had as well, about, are we going to do this?
Oh my gosh. I mean, if I think about it, I remember in 2008, it was, the talks were beginning okay, we should be always thinking of digital at the same time as the book. By 2010, it was we should maybe be thinking of digital before the book because the book's going to be gone by 2012. Then it was, okay, 2012, projects I was working on, the book is going to be gone totally by 2014. Then it was 2016, and now in 2019, I just finished a project where there's digital stuff, but the books are still there, and I'm just sort of thinking, I don't know if the book is going to really go away like we all have been saying it was for the past 8 years, because it's constantly just around the corner. But recently, people have kind of stopped talking about that. I think it really reached a huge apex when Kindle came out, and people were all beginning to get their hands on Kindles, myself included. So you kind of could see it happening. And there was a lot, I think, of hype that it would completely blow away books forever. Interesting.
You have a Kindle, but it's sat on the shelf. It very rarely
I know. Mine as well. I have to recharge it every 2 months so that I and then it just goes and slowly dies down again.
I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? I'm not sure. You've given a lot of explanation, but have we actually pinpointed a definition of disruption? Is it?
Yes, well, that's one of the problems that I didn't touch on in my talk or here as well, because it just seemed to be quite a big thing. A lot of people who criticize when people talk about disruption is they say there's a kind of free and easy use of the word disruption. Disruption meaning sort of just changing and destroying. But I think there's more to it than that. Do you have some stuff on this?
Oh, no, I think it's interesting because this change or destroying and this free and easy, because there's this, Uber is, as I said, is often cited as a disruptive technology, but there's a really interesting article on a startup blog where it says, well, actually, Uber isn't a startup. Isn't disruptive. It's just an upgrade as such. It's the natural evolution of taxis. Basically, you call a taxi by an app. And in fact, that's true. In Oxford where I live, we don't have Uber, but you still call your taxi by app.
Yeah.
It's so.
I think the disruption, and I didn't call up the definition thing in front of me here, but I think the way I understood it was a disruptive technology or disruptive thing will be first kind of won't necessarily catch on right at the beginning, and it'll be looked down upon by everything else, but then slowly it forces everything else to change to be like it was, so like it is. So Airbnb starts off small as something, and it doesn't. It's not necessarily threatening the hotels, but then slowly it starts growing and growing until it does create that wave of change, and then it suddenly exponentially grows. I think I'm
all right. So while you were doing your plenary at TEFL, Gavin Dudley, who's obviously I think well known in ELT for technology, was doing a talk about disruption.
He was.
He kind of puts it more, I think, in an educational context. So I asked him, his talk is on YouTube, and again, we'll link to it. And I asked him if we could put a bit of audio from his talk into it. So here's Gavin introducing his talk.
It's that every day you go into the place where you teach, the school or university, and every other class is putting on their VR headsets and heading off into virtual worlds and technology experiences, the likes of which you can only dream of, because you're in the next room doing the present perfect. From a book.
So basically, he's talking. I think this fits in with what you said prior to the quote, prior to playing that clip. You know, this idea of it's looked down upon, because obviously Gavin is going to talk about AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, bots, etc., and their place in education. And I think that fits true, isn't it? There's a lot of looking down on whether these things actually fit in education or not. I mean, I'm on record as I use VR, but I'm still not quite sure what the purpose of it is in language teaching, for example.
Yes, I mean, I think there has been. I remember when it started out, because often this whole idea of disruption sometimes goes hand in hand with the idea of hype, right? And disruption isn't necessarily hype. I think disruption occurs when it actually has disrupted something. So, sort of like, so it's often like will disrupt, or it's poised for disruption. It's going to be changed by something. But for example, I think we could argue VR has not disrupted education, because it's not being used enough for that to kind of warrant it. It hasn't gotten rid of universities or whatever. But I remember a lot of this stuff started when people, when the new iPhone came out, and how this is supposed to change everything. And then you'd have like, how will education use smartphones? And we were all like happily on that hype cycle for a while. Like, how will Second Life change everything? How will this change everything? And now it's beginning to get, if you've been around it for a while, you're starting to see the pattern. There's always something new just around the corner. And then that will disrupt education. And you get all these blog posts like 5 ways. So the latest was like smart wearables, or the smart classroom, or AI, or chatbots, or whatever.
Yeah, I guess AI is the one that people are concerned about now. I mean, it's like, certainly since the rise of, and if I say this, it will probably switch it on the Alexa. So I say it quietly, so I don't switch it on next to me. And whether we can use these smart speakers, and because I said their heart is an AI, isn't it? The same with the voice things on phones. I guess that's the current hype of maybe they'll disrupt education. With it.
I mean, I think that the other thing is that the disruption also seems to often be cast as like a natural, inevitable thing that's happening. And it's really interesting that I think a lot of the narrative around disruption kind of hooks on and has attraction to people in general because of the narrative of climate change. So you can use a lot of the same kind of imagery. You can use a lot of so people are kind of like ready for that kind of discussion.
Right.
But in difference to climate change, disruption isn't necessarily inevitable or going to like take on a life of its own in the same way that climate change will affect natural processes that then we can't change back and stuff. So disruption, I think, is also about human and societal choices. Okay, yes, climate change is, of course, as well. But the way they talk about disruption is often with images of like tsunamis and earthquakes and rising tides and rising sea levels, as if it is like a natural phenomenon. But it isn't a natural phenomenon. And I think, we at our peril, we sort of, we, you know, we, 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 say, well, it's being disrupted. There's nothing we can do about it, whereas I think, people do have a say in it as teachers in their classrooms. We're getting really serious now.
We are. I was just thinking back. I mean, there's obviously being a bit of an ed techie myself. It's just thinking back of things I've read and seen about it. I was just going back and thinking back to Duolingo, which I put in that list before. I think it was about probably 2013, 14 when I think the ELT Jam people stood up and said, this is going to be the disruption of ELT, which in a sense it is, not in the same way that we've talked here about VR. I mean, it's a disruptor and it's a massive competitor, I think, to language teachers. But
I think also, the other thing that's interesting about so many of these disruptive things within education, as another point, the great person writing all this is a writer called Larry Cuban.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who talks about the regression to mean, where like often these new quote unquote disruptive technologies kind of come along. They're all like wrapped in new technology, and so therefore seem quite modern. But in fact, the more they get adopted, the more they scale up, the more they sort of revert to an old-fashioned thing. So Duolingo is an example. Like, for Duolingo to work at the scale that it works, it's essentially the kind of stuff in language teaching that for a long time communicative language teachers sort of poo-pooed, which is translation, gap fills, context-free sentences, drills, repetition. And I think all of these things are totally important. Don't get me wrong. I do like all these things. But language teaching is about more than just that. So sort of saying it disrupts language teaching, it's like, so we're going back to translation and gap filling now? Okay. Same thing with the disruption of Second Life, which, at the beginning there were lots of like, we can do this. We can have classrooms in Second Life. By the way, if you were too young or you missed Second Life thing, it's a virtual world.
That's funny. You have to explain what Second Life is.
Well, I guess it goes back to 2008, 2009. And so everyone was like, this will completely change education because you can all do it virtually. But the more universities and schools started setting up in Second Life, the more you started seeing really traditional classrooms. Like they would create a virtual classroom of desks with, screwed down chairs in rows with a teacher at the front. So it suddenly looked like that this new innovative technological thing was actually really old-fashioned.
It is interesting. You go to Larry Cooper because it was Teachers and Machines. I think is almost probably a seminal work about classroom technology. And he's written a lot about. I think he's always looking for why technology hasn't transformed the classroom. And I say it because I actually not long ago just finished reading The Flight of a Butterfly, The Path of a Bullet, which was his latest book, and he's gone back into schools, and there's some ELT in that, and he's gone back into schools, and it's just basically case studies of him watching classes going, well, really, and this idea that there's this kind of default of, like you said, you got all this technology, but we default to kind of traditional uses of it in the classroom, which is, which bringing this back around to say VR is kind of where it is. I mean, VR is used, and I'll probably get shot by those that really do use it in a transformative way. But for many teachers, VR is simply another way of showing video in the classroom, Yeah. So, it's just more, I guess, immersive, and that's how that's how I use it. And there are things you could do that you can't do in video. Don't get me wrong, but it is very interesting. But I did enjoy reading The Path of the Butterfly. Although I think if I remember rightly, the most transformative teacher he saw was a Spanish language teacher. So maybe language teachers are leading the way more than we perhaps give credit for. Because this is an area that both you and I can talk probably ad hominem on. So shall I go back? Should we kind of conclude this part? So I played the start of Gavin's talk. Shall I play his conclusion and then?
Sure.
Because I think that's quite an interesting and slightly depressing. All right,
go for it.
My conclusion is that actually disruption ain't what it used to be. We've had two periods of disruption. The first one was good, and that was in the mid-2000s, and that was teachers, and it was an educational disruption. It was people exploring technologies and figuring out what to do with them, and we had some amazingly creative practice during that period. The second period of disruption, referred to by Philip, is an entirely financial-driven disruption, and it's going in completely the wrong direction, and it's taking the soul out of our classrooms.
So I think our discussion would probably always would say You probably agree with that. There's kind of there's a wrong
I think
direction
there is.
going on.
It certainly mirrors my kind of own growth and professional development in the world of technology. So there was like this sort of, and I kind of think it mirrors a little bit like the early internet towards the later internet, you know, like even like early Facebook towards later Facebook, like when all these things start, and you kind of like feel that it was much more open and free until all of a sudden it's all like getting, bought up. Everything's kind of becoming very corporate. There's a whole data issue and so on. Let's take a break, though.
Yeah, let's take a break and then change the meaning of disruption, yeah?
And now it's time for this week's teaching philosophy from a Facebook meme.
Students don't need a perfect teacher. Students need a happy teacher who's gonna make them excited to come to school and grow a love for learning.
So it's interesting, when I said let's do an episode on disruption, you immediately went for the route we talked about in part one. And I said, well, there is a second part as well. And it's kind of almost overlooked now. But disruption is quite common in the classroom, isn't it?
Yes, of course. And I think most teachers, if they were looking at this episode in their podcast feed and saw episode disruption, they would be thinking about the second one, which is our second part of this, which is disruption in classes. Yeah, kinds of things that are disrupting in classes. So like when the teacher has lost control of the class because students are disrupting. You've got some good stuff on surveys of this.
Low-level disruption. I was just quite interesting. In 2014, Ofsted, obviously the British school inspectors, said the equivalent of 38 days of teaching is lost per year to low-level disruption in the classroom.
What kind of examples of that? What is? Well, I have ideas in my head, but did they give you some examples of what?
It's quite interesting, and because it would start where you think, I imagine, talking unnecessarily, the chatting,
like learners.
Not the teachers.
Okay.
Shouting out without permission. Being slow to start work or follow instructions.
Yes.
Showing a lack of respect for other peoples and staff.
Okay.
Not bringing the right equipment.
Yes. That's even more problematic.
Pen, sir. And then so those you think, and then the last one is using mobile phones inappropriately. And
I mean, and I've also, curiously enough, written about this before as well.
No,
but
really?
With this kind of thing, I think, even though an individual time of this kind of thing, like someone not bringing their pen or whatever, or someone clicking their pen in class, like one person, when you click the pen, like you click it on, like it does seem minor, but if it's consistent and if it gets to lots of people, it does, like it derails you, and you have to kind of intervene and do stuff and so on and so forth.
So the clicking pen is your Achilles heel, is it?
Well, it was one of them. Yeah. I mean, it was one of them. So, I mean, there are, I mean, and also there's lots of good books out there on dealing with these kinds of things. One called Dealing with Difficulties. But there are other ones as well.
I've got a really old version of it.
It's
one of the first books I ever bought. In this series, everything it was, and it's completely. It is actually, and I hate to say it, it's quite a good book. Yeah.
Thank you. That's Dealing with Difficulties, everybody. Delta Publishing.
You're putting adverts into a podcast where that's not allowed.
There were some others.
How do you deal with disruption since you've written about it?
Okay. Well, I mean, there are many ways. One is to is setting a classroom example from the beginning, like trying to set out from the beginning of your course what you expect. It's always hard to, and I think that's why more experienced teachers tend to have less problems with this, because they know what to anticipate. So at the beginning of at the beginning of their school year, they set out the rules, hopefully with student input. But even if it's without, you sort of let people know and not kind of let it be a slippery slope. Other things are,
that's have a routine. Yeah. Kind of thing,
routines is very good for this. I think also a curious one. Now, I'm of two minds of this, but there's also the one of like, the more the teacher raises their voice, the more they will continue to raise their voice. So the louder you get, the louder everyone gets. And the reverse can sometimes work, that you don't raise your voice too high, that you start lowering your voice to speak quieter, and then that can bring the volume down in the classroom. I think I'm 50-50 on that. Sometimes I've used it really well. Other times I haven't. There's also the idea, there's lots of things. One that I quite like in terms of, this I learned from my co-writer of dealing with difficulties, Luke Perdramu.
Yeah.
He was really good at this. He used to tell me, he would say, he would teach like classrooms of Greek teenagers, Greek 12-year-olds, and he said they would be very disruptive. But then he would call them out on their negative behavior, like, for example, Stephanopoulos, put down your pen, it's time to listen now. Or I can see that you're, stop scribbling on your book. Please stop that right now. But the way he would do that is he would do it just as he was turning around to write something on the board. So he would see the action before, turn around to write something on the board, and then half turn and say it like quite sharply, and continue with the lesson. So, not make a big deal of it. But he said it was the eyes in the back of the head, kind of thing.
I'm smart. You can't see me obviously, but I'm smiling because obviously I've taught in Greece, and I remember how misbehaved Greek kids were. And I'm not sure if I said this anecdote before, but this is right back in the beginning of the 1990s, and I was teaching a private language school, and Greek kids are boisterous, and they're fun, and they're boisterous. And I remember one father coming to me, he's like, if Costa steps out of line, feel free to hit him. What?
Yeah. I think the other thing is the better, like you can also have what I call discipline friendly activities. So you plan a lesson, especially if you're with a disruptive group, that you have certain things, activities on hand that. There are some activities in English language classrooms that always cause disruption, like the running dictation or any kind of like group speaking thing does become disruptive. Like it's noisy and so on. Whereas writing activities, dictations and things like that are discipline friendly activities in the sense that they can calm down a group and so on. So it's often a question of like preparing your lessons so you have a balance of those kinds of things. There are many other. As you're giving your examples, I'm comparing it to a Guardian newspaper article which has 10 ways to deal with low-level disruption in the classroom. I think I've seen that one as
well.
I'm
kind of testing you to see if you match the list. But you've got most of them. Yeah, adjust the volume, which is the one about being loud. Move around is one. I don't think you said.
Yes, that is also good. Like if you're using the space, so often moving around, just the teacher, and everyone can remember this themselves. If you're talking with a friend, but if the teacher is moving around and like walks by the desk, that will sometimes quiet things down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
most of them are the same. Don't deviate from teaching, which is quite good. There's no need to basically keep on going is what they're saying with that. But also, which I quite like, be positive and share your expectations with it, because obviously kids have different levels of expectation, and
I think the other thing is be realistic and forgiving of yourself. Like, even if you do follow all these things and you do it great, there are times where they will get the better of you. Like, there are times where a class will go badly, and I think we need to kind of, like, it's a problem if it happens all the time, but I think we need to not beat ourselves up when, like, the one time it does, it's like I couldn't control them today, or today they were just crazy, out of control. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad teacher. I think
there's a lot of factors. We seem to have naturally put this into the environment of kids, I think, because adults can be disruptive as well.
Adults can definitely be disruptive, and I think with adults being disruptive also, it becomes more when they have lost respect for you as a teacher. And often I think that's when I've seen it, it's when they think that the teacher is either not prepared or not professional enough. So it's like, if you're not going to try, I'm not going to try, So I think with adults, I often find calming disruption is just being keeping on with my teaching and being more keen about what I'm like, my enthusiasm becoming contagious to them. That also works with kids, but with adults, I find the disruptive problems is when they've decided, okay, that you didn't try, you're not trying, so I'm not going to try.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing which we haven't mentioned yet, but this comes up in a lot of literature. That's the reward chart. How do you feel about those?
Well, I think that that's something that we might have to just fight about.
Okay, bring it on.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Hello and welcome to another round of TEFL Fights, in which our two competitors duke it out to decide who's right and who's wrong. So what are the Queensberry rules? Well, each fighter will have 1 minute to argue their case and do some serious damage to their competitor. In round 2, they'll have the chance to follow up and land the knockout blow, persuading the judge, that's me, that they've managed to win. So in this bout, our brave pugilists will be sparring over this topic.
Reward systems do not motivate good behaviour in students. So going first and arguing for the proposition, it's Lindsay. Seconds out, let's go.
Okay, so I'm arguing that reward systems do not motivate good behavior in students. By reward systems, what do I mean? I mean things like sweets, gold stars, stickies, stickers, parties, etc., or a chart where people get points. These are usually given in return for good behavior or good grades or whatever the teacher deems as good. In fact, rewards are a form of quid pro quo. So there are several problems with quid pro quos, as we know. First of all, first problem with this that we might think they might not motivate good behavior is maintenance. This is yet another thing for the teacher to keep track of. And if you mess it up or get it wrong, this can have the reverse effect, as students, especially young learners, are sensitive to injustice. Problem number 2 is satiation. Once the reward system becomes normal, the effect is reduced. It's easy to start rewards, it's hard to remove them. And the effect of the reduced keeps getting more, it's not so special anymore. Problem number 3, there is a difference between learning from something and just finishing something. If we have...
Thank you, Lindsay. So, Shaun, it's your turn now. I hope you're ready. Seconds out, let's go.
So reward systems are one of the most effective ways of establishing a positive classroom environment. They promote good behaviour and incentivise students. So says the Times Educational Supplement. But let's not just take their word for it. Let's look at the advice of a leading ELT guru and what he gives on that topic. And I'll quote: "A built-in system of rewards provides extrinsic motivation for students to behave better. The advantage of using rewards is that one kind of sanction can involve withholding or postponing them. Making motivating group rewards dependent on good behaviour will also mean that the group itself will punish misbehaviour of its members without you having to do anything. Take every opportunity to reward students for their efforts." And of course, that leading ELT guru is Lindsay Clanfield, and that's page 43 of the book mentioned earlier in the podcast. So he's trying to argue that rewards aren't motivating, yet he clearly says they are. They're also a good system, and you'll see it all over the place, for bringing joy to students, boosting their self-esteem, and also encouraging getting completed homework and improved results.
Thank you, Shaun. And that's the end of round 1. Some great fighting going on here. Okay, the fighters are taking a break, drinking some water, readjusting their gum shields, but I think it's time we get on with round 2. So over to you, Lindsay.
Right. So, okay, thanks very much, Shaun, for using my own words against me in this debate. As any scholar, as any student of motivation will know, that intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation are two different things. And while I stand by that they do provide extrinsic motivation, at language learning, we're all about, in the end, we're about intrinsic motivation. And while those might give a short boost, a short dopamine boost to students, in the long run, they will not.
And that's time up there, Lindsay. Thank you very much. Okay, Shaun, it's your turn. Over to you.
Don't listen to him. You've heard me say the real words. Can only be one winner in this debate because I've proven that he's talking fake news. Simple as that.
So that brings our TEFL fight to an end. And as you well know, listener, TEFL fights are not just about the strength of arguments, but about the strength of the arguing. And I have to say, when it comes to this fight, there's only one winner. I think we all know that we witnessed an absolute murder here today. Congratulations, Shaun.
Okay, so I'm going to claim that as a win anyway. It was a win-win because you gave me this deliberately. You gave me this deliberately because you knew I had written that, which I had written. I stand by
now
it.
Listen,
Two, opinions are allowed to change, so maybe I don't stand by it. I don't even know anymore. Oh my gosh, where's my gold sticker? Where is my gold sticker?
So thank you for joining us, and thank you to our fighters on this TEFL fight.
Dear listeners, when we came up with the idea of the fight, I said to Lindsay, you choose which side you want to argue. Right? So he walked into the trap.
Okay, yes, because while I do stand by the reward systems and they can't do a group thing, I also believe one is able to hold two beliefs at the same time. I think. I also believe
the
that
TEFL fight isn't about actually holding opinions; it's about arguing a side. We've both argued things.
I know, and I knew as soon as I did that, as soon as I was doing the research, I suddenly had this sinking feeling: have I written something about rewards being good in the past?
You've read 2 pages of it in your book.
Yeah,
2 whole
but
pages.
I mean, there's still 2 pretty good pages, and
They are. So
I do
the thing is,
like my gold
to
stars.
be fair,
Yep.
I misquote as ever. I mean, there was a little bit of misquoting going on because, not misquoting. I have changed and I put the quotes together, right, and edited a little bit from it.
Oh, so you set me up as a straw man.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's true. I think the point here is reward systems are, one of those things that, there are good arguments for and the good arguments against.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody using a reward system should blindly walk in with and go, let's do a reward system. I think it's very important to cover the points against it.
I just regret that I didn't get to the end of my argument where I had a lot more about quid pro quos. But anyway.
It's a minute goes so fast. Even when we speak really ridiculously quick. But
all right.
Anyway, it was good. We haven't done a fight for ages, but I think, and not that I keep score, but I think that's 3-1. Was it 3-2 to me?
And I think that's the end of another episode. Look how the time flies. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Where can they find us if they want more TEFL Commute, or they want to tell a friend about it, or they want to get in touch with us, Shaun?
So we can be found at teflcommute.com, and there you will find the show notes for every episode we've done. So if you want to see the links of the things we referred to and talked about in this episode, that's where you go. You'll also find our library of previous episodes on that website. And if you just want to listen to us, then you can find us on iTunes, you can find us on Spotify, and all good podcast hosting services. I'll see you next time. This has been Shaun. Winner, Shaun. Sorry.
Well done, Shaun. Here's a little gold star for you.
Oh, thanks.
I've been Lindsay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
As your commute is coming to an end, here's an activity you can take into class. When you notice a usually disruptive student behaves well, e.g. by completing an exercise or answering a question correctly, respond by praising the student publicly. Disruptive students are usually accustomed to being called out for being bad. Here are some examples of things you could say. That's exactly the answer I was waiting for. Excellent answer. Well done. Well done. You finished the exercise and in record time too. Did everyone hear the student? He or she had the right answer. Yes, you've got the right idea. Excellent. Please note to make sure that you do this with well-behaved students as well, and in equal measure if possible. Disruptive students tend to get more teacher attention anyway, even if for the wrong reasons, and this can be seen as unfair by the other students. You've been listening to the TEFL Commute, an original podcast produced and presented by Lindsay Clanfield, Shaun Wilden and James Taylor. Don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or your podcast player of choice, and by visiting us at teflcommute.com.
Oh my gosh, where's my gold sticker? Where is my gold sticker?